You're listening to the Dueling Pistols podcast, where we read and discuss the stories of our past and explore some of the most wild adventures from modern history.
No, bro. George Washington said, stay strapped or get clapped, and I'm all about that. I ain't,
Floyd had split his surveying party into 3 groups.
Bro, you never split up. Never split up. You seen Scooby-Doo? Nothing good happens when the group splits.
As they tried to drag the canoe to the shore, Fanny Calloway beat him over the head with the paddle until it broke.
Good job, Fanny.
When the man in front goes down, pick up his rifle and shoot.
I hate this guy.
Yeah?
I hate this guy. I want him dead. I want him to die, and die a somewhat miserable death.
We ain't like the British. We dissed everything, including the accent.
One of the Shawnees killed that day was the son of the man who would become Boone's captor and adoptive father.
Wow. Bro, this is like a freaking soap opera. That is ridiculous. Does he have an evil twin that's going to pop out sometime too?
Triggered by Black Flag.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Brent, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you.
For those that are listening for the first time, I'm Brian Call. It's my brother, Brent Call. And we're launching a new podcast. This is episode 1. This is the title of the book, Boone, a biography by Robert Morgan. Kind of talk about an American icon, Daniel Boone. You ready for this?
I'm ready. Let's crack it.
Daniel Boone and George Washington are basically the same age. Within a year or two.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay, that definitely puts it in a little different perspective.
Changes everything. You're talking about early 1700s when people were just coming into the Americas for the first time from England and establishing themselves. Daniel Boone is a Quaker, known as a fighting Quaker, opposed to the non-fighting version. We'll get into that in the book. But him and George Washington are actually, there's a story of them I think they were on some kind of cargo transport or something when they got attacked by the French, I think, something like that. We'll get into it. It's been a while since I've read the book, but
those French need to settle down.
Basically, they get the hell out of there with their lives. And Abraham Lincoln as well comes in Boone's footsteps through the Cumberland Gap. Daniel Boone is one of those characters that is considered probably the main mountain man who, I'd say, what is he, frontiersman who sort of finds a way to get through the Appalachian Mountains and opens up Kentucky and the rest of the nation on the other side as he finds a way through, or he makes the way through more popular. He's a fascinating character, fascinating human. He lives to be a ripe old age, like 80s something.
Wow.
When many of his own children, many others don't survive. He's a fascinating character in which he spends years alone, just hunting, trapping, fishing, and then comes back to civilization and fits right in too and tells jokes and is well liked. And he's sort of an enigma, like different. So very fascinating book. I think everyone will get a lot out of it.
That's crazy to me because I like see people like you managed you go out for a couple of weeks at a time. You know,
yeah.
Lampers, he's just kind of funky.
Lampers and Boone. So ironically, I read this book with Ryan Lampers, a good friend of ours, a good friend of mine, also known as Stealthy Hunter on Instagram and other places. I had read the book and I'm like, Ryan, this dude reminds me of you. You need to read this book. So he did. And then we did an hour or 2 hour podcast about the book because I wanted someone that I liked, that I respected to read it. And then I wanted to have a conversation, but no one I knew had read the book. So Ryan did me the solid, read the book, and then we kind of talked about it. Well, all those years later, here we are. I think it's worthy of a more in-depth breakdown and a whole podcast series dedicated to this book. And when we finish this book, we're going to do another one and another one and another one. We have a whole list of books that I think are life-changing, actually. So let's get into this book. Forget the coonskin cap. He never wore one. Daniel Boone thought coonskin caps uncouth, heavy, and uncomfortable. He always wore a beaver felt hat to protect him from sun and rain. The coonskin-topped Boone is the image from Hollywood and television. Brent, look up the difference between coonskin and beaver felt. I'm very curious. The coonskin-topped Boone, so he was sort of made up from a Hollywood film. That's not what he wore. He hated them. That's interesting. He was neither the discoverer of Kentucky nor the first settler in the bluegrass region. He did not discover the Cumberland Gap, known to the Indians as Quasiota, nor was he the first white man to dig ginseng in the North American wilderness. And though he held the rank of lieutenant colonel in the militia more than once, he was for the most part a reluctant soldier and Indian fighter.
So, like that?
Right there
That's
is
a
beaver hat. Yep. Mhm.
Okay, because that's the one like you and Anthony had on that trip.
Yeah.
It looks very Canadian to me. I think any hat that has ear flaps, whether it's got plaid out or not, just screams Canadian.
Yeah, but he wore a beaver felt hat.
Okay, that's different. Because I did see one of those. That looks like something like almost Indiana Jones.
Yeah, a beaver felt hat to protect him from the sun and the rain. It's kind of like just a sort of a cowboy hat.
It's what it looks like. It's like your traditional cowboy hat.
A fedora, maybe. Kind of a blend between the two. So, but he didn't wear a coonskin topped hat, or coonskin hat, which is basically looks like a fur hat with a tail hanging out the back. And very, very Hollywood, I suppose. It says that although he held the rank of lieutenant colonel in the militia more than once, he was for the most part a reluctant soldier and Indian fighter. As one of his first biographers said, he never delighted in the shedding of human blood, even that of his enemies in war, and avoided it whenever he could. The real story of Daniel Boone is more complicated than the fiction, stranger, and far more interesting. It was Emerson who said, all history resolves itself very easily into the biography of a few stout and earnest persons. Certainly Boone was one of those stout and earnest individuals. Even in his own time, Boone had a number of detractors, debunkers, and critics. He was at different times accused of treason, fraud, and hypocrisy, and was once court-martialed, only to be exonerated and given a promotion by the board of presiding officers.
When does this guy find the time? He's supposed to be a mountain man, living years at a time in the mountain.
He has that time, too.
That's like a soap opera right there.
He was blamed for his dishonest and incompetent land surveying, and sued again and again for debt. Yet, surviving records show he was a competent surveyor, though sometimes careless with clerical and legal work. By the end of his life, he had paid off all that his accusers said he owed. He was also blamed for siding with Indians and accused of being a white Indian. Yet he fortified and defended Boonesboro against an attack led by his adopted father, the Shawnee chief Blackfish. Boone was also accused of being a Tory, a British sympathizer during the American Revolution, yet he fought the British-led Indian attacks on Kentucky forts again and again.
It just sounds like this guy can't win.
For me, the most striking and surprising result of a closer look at Boone is the way his sterling moral character shines steadily through all the vicissitudes of his remarkable life, the scholar Nelson L. Dawson wrote in 1998. Known as a scout and hunter, Boone became a patriarch, serving in legislatures and militias and on boards of trustees. A humble person who described himself as a common man. Boone was famous in both America and Europe. At one time, he may have owned upward of 30,000 acres of land in Kentucky. He ran a tavern, a store, and a warehouse, and he traded furs, hides, ginseng, horses, even slaves, and land. He lost it all. A recognized leader all his life, he moved often as a gypsy. With little formal education and uncertain spelling, he read a number of books and had a flair for language, even eloquence. He even made up a lot of his own words. Like most great figures in American history, Boone has been both lucky and unlucky in his biographers. The schoolmaster and sometime surveyor and land speculator John Filson made Boone famous when Boone turned 50 in 1784. Filson's Discovery, Settlement, and Present State of Kentucky, that's his book, included a long chapter called The Adventures of Colonel Daniel Boone. Written in the first person as though it was biography, the little book, destined to become a classic, was translated into French and German and pirated and paraphrased by a number of other authors. Reprinted by Gilbert Imlay in a topographical description of the Western Territory of North America, published in London in 1793, the narrative made Boone famous in Britain and helped inspire such budding romantic poets as Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Robert Southey. Only recently have we come to appreciate how much American Romanticism may have influenced British Romanticism. But the impact of Boone's story and legend on Williams Bartram, Wordsworth, Byron, and other writers of the Romantic era is only the beginning of the story of the legend of Boone and his biography. Few other Americans have had their lives told so often and in such a wide range of styles, combining truth, insight, myth, hearsay, and outright fabrication. Because he became a figure of American folklore, even while alive, Boone has been thought by many to be virtually a fictional character, subject of tall tales like Mike Fink and the Keel Boatman, or even Paul Bunyan. A professor with a PhD in English and tenure at a major university once said to me, Quote, I never realized Daniel Boone was an actual person. I thought he was a creation of folklore. I told her that even though she was wrong, she was also half right, because the Boone most people know about is largely the creation of folklore. It is hard to rescue figures like Daniel Boone and Johnny Appleseed from the distortions of television and Walt Disney. Damn Disney. The folklore and legends are part of the story too, but should be identified and separated from the facts. When viewed in the larger context of the colonial age, the Boone legend is in many ways typical of the way stories and figures of quest and conquest were romanticized as Europeans conquered lands and peoples. Yet many aspects of Boone's character are atypical, virtually unique. While Boone more than once told visitors that Filson's account of his life was true, was true, every word truth. He was not so pleased with Daniel Bryan's would-be epic poem, The Mountain Muse, published in 1813, which portrayed him as a ridiculously heroic figure, a kind of American Moses. Such productions ought to be left until the person, this is a quote, such productions ought to be left until the person was put in the ground, he is reported to have said. Of the rumor that he still went hunting at the age of 80, he observed to Reverend John Mason Peck, I would not believe that tale if I told it myself. I have not watched the deer's lick for 10 years. My eyesight is too far gone to hunt. During Boone's later years, many accounts of his exploits and adventures were published in newspapers in America and Britain. Most took their details and rhetoric from Filson, and some contained an element of truth, but also included rumors and fancy, often portraying the old woodsman as a fierce Indian killer. That sells better. Wrestling bears and panthers in hand-to-hand combat, that sells great too. Mm-hmm. More than once, he read accounts of his own death in newspapers. The stories that formed around Boone's name while he was alive were only the seeds of what would come later. The Reverend Timothy Flint, who had visited Boone in 1816, published the first book-length biography, biographical memoir of Daniel Boone in 1833. The book was very popular and for its time a bestseller, but while it contained some valuable information, it was also filled with colorful yarns, such as the improbable story of young Daniel almost shooting his future bride Rebecca while fire hunting at the Yadkin. When questioned about some of the exaggerations in his narrative, Flint is supposed to have answered he was not writing a book for use but to sell. Well, I was writing a lie because it sold better than the truth. It was Flint who gave the world the most famous Boone quote about wanting, quote, more elbow room. There's a story that he lived, some 30 miles from his neighbor. And so when he had people moving in within 20 miles of his house, he's like, we got to move, Rebecca. Everyone's getting too close. We need more elbow room. He just liked to be far, far away. So that's the story. But another itinerant minister who wrote about the Western frontier, Reverend John Mason Peck, visited Boone in December of 1818, 2 years before the woodsman's death. Expecting to find a rough backwoods man, Peck was surprised by Boone's calm, good manners, his modesty and cheerfulness. Peck was struck by the affection in which Boone was held by his children and grandchildren and his neighbors. When Peck published his, quote, Life of Boone in 1847, he stressed the image of Boone as a peacemaker, diplomat, reluctant Indian fighter, and instrument of manifest destiny. Boone's descendants much preferred Peck's account to Flint's. It was Peck who told the story of Boone's journey back to Kentucky to pay his debts after he sold the land Congress had awarded him in Missouri. According to Peck, Boone then returned to Missouri with only 50 cents in his pocket. No one will say, quote, no one will say when I am gone, Boone was a dishonest man. Boone was most fortunate of all in attracting the scholar and writer Lyman Copeland Draper, who never finished or published his, quote, Life of Daniel Boone. A native of upstate New York, Draper, who was born in 1815 and died in 1891, worked as a clerk, editor, and journalist, but devoted his life to collecting information and documents for the study of the Western frontier and the Revolutionary War era. He borrowed, bought, begged, copied, and some said stole thousands of documents and interviewed hundreds of survivors and descendants. He corresponded with hundreds more and seemingly came in contact with everyone who ever lived in the frontier Ohio Valley or was descended from the pioneers that were there. Draper interviewed Daniel Boone's youngest son, Nathan, and Nathan's wife, Olive Van Bibber Boone, at length in 1851.
What was that name?
Olive Van Bibber
Boone.
Boone. Yeah.
Olive Van Bibber Boone.
Olive Van Bibber. That's the middle
Van
name.
Bibber. Van Bibber is a name.
Van Bibber.
That's got to be like a maiden name or something.
Olive Van Bibber Boone.
Van Bibber Boone. That's
Let's call her Olive. Nathan and Olive. Olive was quite pretty, by the way, as the story's told. And Nathan really wanted her, so he made it happen. Yeah, he interviewed Boone's youngest son, Nathan, and Nathan's wife, Olive, at their home in 1851. As Secretary of the State Historical Society of Wisconsin and Madison, Draper collected and hoarded documents and transcripts. Rather than completing his projected biographies of Boone and George Rogers Clark and other pioneers, at his death, he left an ocean of interviews and papers scholars have been struggling through and sifting ever since. So the man collected it, but never
did anything with it.
Never made it into like a final deal. So he just was a treasure trove of all that paperwork and all those interviews and all that information, like a genealogist's dream.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Draper was small in stature, but a giant of American historical scholarship. Quote, "I am a small bit of a fellow," he wrote to one correspondent, "yet small as I am and as good for nothing as I often think myself, I yet feel that I have something to do." One of the assistants Draper trained at the State Historical Society of Wisconsin was Reuben Gold Thwaites. When Draper retired, Thwaites succeeded him as director of the society and became one of the most important editors and writers on frontier history of his time. In 1902, Thwaites published his own biography of Boone called simply Daniel Boone. It was the first published life of Boone to make use of the hoard of documents that Draper had collected over his lifetime. In 1920, a professor of mathematics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Archibald Henderson, published The Conquest of the Old Southwest, to much acclaim. Henderson was a descendant of Judge Richard Henderson, founder of the Transylvania Company and Boone's employer. And he stressed the significance of the Transylvania venture in the founding of Kentucky and Tennessee. Transylvania was kind of like a land development company.
Okay, that makes more sense. I was confused.
I think railways, building houses, like a builder.
Okay.
In the modern terms.
Gotcha.
Right? Henderson planned to follow that history with Life of Daniel Boone, but a peculiar chemistry began to work on the professor as he proceeded with his project. He decided that his ancestor, Richard Henderson, was the real hero of the story of Kentucky, and that Daniel Boone was little more than a hired hand.
Weird.
He became a debunker of Boone, and at 4th of July celebrations and memorial ceremonies, he made a spectacle of himself attempting to build up the reputation of his ancestor and belittle the scout and hunter who had hacked Boone's trace and given his name to Boonesboro. So Boone's trace, which we'll learn about in the book, is basically a trail. Boone's trace is like trace meant. They had other things named after people, but it's like their trail, the trace that they left behind.
So is this the one that goes to the Appalachian Mountains? Is that what they?
Yeah.
named
So
it?
Boone's trace is like a famous trail that he created, and it led to, I believe, Boonesboro, which was a city he founded with early settlers. He did that repeatedly. Boone sort of always on the front of, moving civilization to a new place and establishing new communities. And then it would get crowded and he'd go, "I'm out." And he would move further into the wilderness, mingle with the Indians, get along with them, and people would slowly trickle and follow. And then it'd get too crowded with white people and Europeans and stuff, and colonials. And then he'd be like, "I'm out." And then he'd go to the next one, and he just kept moving west. He just wanted to be where and explore new places and be where no one had gone before. He loved the native peoples. So what we're reading about here is how Archibald Henderson basically was like, "Yeah, screw Boone. Richard Henderson was the real deal, and Boone sucked. Boone was just the guy that got hired by him." So he's kind of wanting to take away all of Boone's accomplishment and give him to his own ancestor. It says in the end, Archibald Henderson was unable to write the biography, and his research material was left to the University of North Carolina as the Henderson Papers, a valuable resource in the North Carolina collection. Probably the most successful biography of Boone ever published was John Bakeless's 1939 volume, Master of the Wilderness, Daniel Boone.
That's a title right there. That's a good. All the other ones suck so far. The Life of Daniel Boone. No,
Yeah.
Beastmaster. Like, it just came in.
It says, Bakeless, a historian and professor of journalism at New York University, drew heavily on modern research of the frontier period and made extensive use of the Draper collection at Madison. So the book went through several editions. It talks about he had little interest in the Indians and Indian culture except to portray them as savages or as slaves who were present in so much of the activity of the frontier. Implicit in much of Bakeless's narrative is the assumption of the superiority of white culture, destined to subdue and transform the wilderness into an ideal American civilization.
So that Boone's Trace, it's one of the oldest roads in America.
Yeah.
You see these before and after pictures where it's like a dirt road,
Right.
and they superimpose it. That's pretty trippy.
So it says in 1992, John Faragher published Daniel Boone, The Life and Legend of an American Pioneer, and brought to his study of Boone. So basically there's a lot of books, and I'm going to skip this next part where it's just talking about all the different books that have been written about him throughout his life. So many books have been written. He's like, why should I write another one? And
That's kind of my thought.
And he's like, because none of them were really as clearly written as he felt like he could do. Robert Morgan. As I did my research on the Revolutionary period in the Carolinas of 1781, I grew more and more preoccupied. So he talks about how he was writing a book, and he started to become more and more preoccupied in his research for this other book he was working on, with the life on the frontier, where white settlers mingled and fought with and learned from the native population. So he's very curious about how they cooperated, how they got along, and started paying more attention to the nuances of frontier life. I came to see what an extraordinary story that was, the collision of different worlds right in my own backyard. As British confronted French, Indians fought Indians, white regulators confronted the colonial government, and finally Americans fought the crown. And through it all, the thread of slavery stretched like a poisoned filament from earliest colonial times to the 19th century and the Civil War. I found Boone a much more complex person than I had noticed before. Why was he remembered, romanticized, revered, and written about when many other figures on the Kentucky frontier were pretty much forgotten? I wanted to find out what it was about Daniel Boone that made him lodge in the memory of all who knew him and made so many want to tell his story. How was a scout and hunter turned into such an icon of American culture? In the course of my research, I discovered that Boone had been a Freemason and that his membership in the society connected him in unexpected ways with leading figures of the American Revolution, such as Benjamin Franklin and Washington. And with the new spirit of brotherhood, liberty, and reason spreading through Europe and North America, no other Boone scholar seemed to have noticed Boone's association with Masonry. I also found that Boone was a great dreamer, and a significant part of his dream was a vision of hunting and living at peace with the Indians in the wilderness over the mountains. It was a vision and a longing that set him apart from many other hunters of the time. Boone many times referred to himself as a woodsman. It was the description he seemed to prefer, the identity he chose to claim. When he wrote to Governor Isaac Shelby in 1796, asking for the contract to rebuild the Wilderness Road, Boone said, "I am no statesman. I am a woodsman, and think myself, capable of making, marking, and cutting the road. When young, I studied engineering and wanted to build roads also. Many of the narratives I have written concern path blazing and road building." That was another aspect of Boone I felt a deep connection with. Boone the artisan and artificer, Boone the road maker. Yeah, it's really interesting to get into the book and hear how this time frame, what this time frame entailed, because we tend to look at it from a really simplistic point of view. Some have said the name Boone comes from from Norman Boone, from the nobleman Henry de Boone. The Boones had lived in Devonshire for centuries. This is in England, working as weavers and blacksmiths before they immigrated to Pennsylvania. Boone's mother was Sarah Morgan, descended from Welsh Quakers from Merionethshire in the mountains of North Wales. In one of the happiest accidents of punning etymologies known, I didn't know there was a happy accident of punning etymologies.
Did I miss the joke?
Americans acquired the word boondocks from Tagalog in the Philippines. And from that wonderful word meaning mountains derived the term boonies, referring to the hinterlands, the backcountry.
So they took a word from Tagalog and
Called boondocks.
Boondocks.
From the Philippines. And from that wonderful word, Brent, meaning mountains, they derived the term boonies, referring to the hinterlands, the backcountry. We got to go way back out into the boonies.
Wow,
we're
that's
from the boonies.
weird. Did we even know the Philippines existed back then? That's crazy.
Many wrongly assume boonies comes to us from the name Boone, explorer of hinterlands and backcountry. And we also have the old French word boon, as in boon companion, from the Latin bonus, meaning good. And from Old Norse, we have boon, meaning a blessing or benefit, coming from a word that meant prayer. Boon is also an Old English word for the rough fiber taken out of flax as it is prepared for spinning into thread. The Boones had been weavers for generations in Devonshire. Boone was fortunate in his name, if not in his business enterprises.
Ooh, ouch. Chill there, Robert.
So, yeah.
You have to come at my guy like that.
So, very interesting. That name is a little it's got so many different sources of where it came from. It says, let's see, they may say what they please of Daniel Boone. He acted with wisdom in that matter, Simon Kenton remarked about rumors of Boone's dishonesty and treachery once he surrendered some salt boilers in 1778. Kenton meant the truth of the man's deeds and character would rise above all the clouds of rumor spread by detractors, and for more than 2 centuries it has. When you're a doer of deeds, there's always going to be jealous, petty people who hate winners. You're also going to have mistakes that you make and that you're rightfully criticized for. Mm-hmm. You're out there, like Theodore Roosevelt says, the man in the arena is the one that puts his neck on the line. Mm-hmm. And therefore, he gets all the glory, but he also gets all the hate, too. Yep. He gets all the criticism. Critics just sit on the sidelines and talk about stuff. And
meanwhile, that guy's getting punched in the face. Yeah.
So anyway, the book goes on. So basically, I want to jump ahead a little bit. In the book, you learn that there was religious goings on in England, and the church, the Quakers, were kind of growing and evolving and changing. They ended up, learning about the New World and deciding to immigrate to America and leave for various reasons. You can go back in history and you'll learn like the oppression of the government coming in and dictating how you should live. So a lot of early folks left, and it says George Boone II, well, it goes through, there's the second, the third, there's all these just George Boones back then. And we're talking about 1666. Squire Boone was born in 1696. Now, Squire is Daniel Boone's father. So 1696, pretty much the turn of the century, 1700. Think of that. Think of Daniel Boone's father born in 1700. Okay. You're talking, 1860s, 1880s is when Jeremiah Johnson was doing mountain man exploits in the Americas, 1850s, 60s, 80s. This is 1700 we're talking about, Boone's father. What happens is they join, they have what they call the Friends meeting, which is how they referred to each other in the Quaker community as friends. And so they'd all get together, and it's just like their church community, and they would talk about how they should behave and things like that, and kind of your early communities. It would seem the younger Boones were sent to Pennsylvania to scout out opportunities. So the Boone family sent some members of the Boone family to go to America to see, is this a place we should move? And eventually they decide that they will. There's some notes from this time period, the 1700s, early 1700s, where 1713, something like that. There's a handwritten copy that still exists of the Devon Hall records of Exeter in the letter where George III, which is, I believe, Boone's great Boone's grandfather. He says, I am constrained to make mention of this my transgression, not without grief, because back then they would write a letter of confession to the community as they were all trying to be better people, and they would say, I'm sorry that I wasn't perfect and I should do better. And it says, and so I'll read the letter. It says, I am constrained to make mention of this my transgression, not without grief, but with trouble and sorrow of heart, for this my wickedness, which was keeping of wild company, and drinking, by which I sometimes became guilty of drunkenness to the dishonor of truth. Like I got drunk and then I lied and did other things. And then he goes on to confess another shortcoming. I fell into another gross evil, which I also confess to my great shame and sorrow, that I did so little regard the Lord and the dear mercies of the Lord, but went on in another gross sin, by which the honor due unto marriage was lost, for the marriage bed was defiled. This was written in December 1716. Got drunk, did some bad stuff, and he also cheated on his wife.
So that's why they moved to America?
No. This is just an example of
Quakerism,
the guilt, and they want to fix this, and this is just a very now they do they make their way to America, and in Oregon they have the George Fox University. That's Quaker. It says right here, many Quakers had already gone to the to the New World in the 1600s. William Penn, the son of an admiral, highly respected by King Charles II, had been inspired by the inner light as a youth and was expelled from Oxford University for refusing to attend Anglican services. He became associated with George Fox and preached on the continent, the U.S., and it says he served as trustee for Quakers immigrating to the New World. By 1678, there were hundreds of Quakers from Yorkshire living in New York. Remember, Squire Boone was born in 1700. So there's already a whole host of Quakers and family people and stuff already in America. They're in Pennsylvania, hence, William Penn. You hear George Fox University is there. There's a lot of things go on with early immigrants related to the Quaker community. Okay. They were in Pennsylvania, where Swedish immigrants had earlier built settlements. The headquarters of the Quakers in America was established at Burlington, New Jersey, in 1677. So they get sort of established there. And this is where it says, here Squire Boone, who had become the father of Daniel Boone, met Edward's daughter Sarah, and then they kind of hook up, get married. And then Daniel Boone comes from that. It says that Boone's father, Squire Boone, has been described as a rather small man with fair skin, red hair, and gray eyes. Sarah Morgan was taller than most women, with black eyes and black hair, strong and active. The marriage of Squire and Sarah is described in the Gwynedd Friends Meeting book. So they keep all these records at the church, and they still have them today. So, I'm not going to read that, but it says, until death do you part, you guys will stay married and stay forever. Yes.
Cute.
So they do that. Okay. And then they move a few times. This kind of sets the tone for the time frame. It says that Grandpa Boone, George III, bought 400 acres of fine meadowland and forest. By 1728, remember, they moved there in 1717. So by 1728, so that would be, 12 years later, 14 years later, George III had built a mill at Exeter. And we have the impression of years of prosperity. So while they're living there, they're making money, they've been doing well. But after a period of peaceful relations with Indians, the area was suddenly threatened by Shawnees. George Boone wrote to the governor requesting help. Our condition at present looks with a bad vizard, for undoubtedly the Indians will fall down upon us very suddenly, and our inhabitants are generally fled. There remains about 20 men with me to guard my mill. That sounds dire.
Yeah, that sounds scary.
Many settlers were so frightened they left their homesteads. Within days, 11 Indians painted for war and carrying weapons arrived near Van Bibber's township.
So there's 11 versus 20?
Going door to door, demanding provisions and drink. A posse of 20 local men gathered to pursue the warriors. The leader of the Indian band refused to negotiate and fired on the settlers, wounding 2 before fading into the forest. The settlers took refuge in a mill, possibly George Boone's mill, Grandpa Boone. The Shawnees were on their way to join a party of Delawares in a campaign against the Flatfeet, as the Catawbas were sometimes called. In all, they wounded 5 settlers in what luckily turned out to be the only ever hostile encounter between whites and Native Americans in the Philadelphia area.
That's not bad. No one died.
That's pretty remarkable.
I'm going to chalk that one up called a win.
What's so funny is it's like 11 dudes here, this 8 guys here. It's not like scores and scores of humans.
I know these numbers that they throw out. You're like, okay, I can get 11 guys together.
Yeah. It's like, okay.
Okay.
It says because of their cooperation, craftsmanship, division of labor, and hard work, the Quakers were well adapted for frontier life. Basically, they're hard-working farm people that work together. They were used to being frugal, self-reliant, and resourceful. They raised their own sheep and flax, spun their own wool and linen, wove their own cloth. In the Philadelphia area, the Quakers were the majority and became the leaders of the colony. The Boones were leaders of their community. Squire Boone became the trustee of the Ole monthly meeting, and his brother George IV and his wife Deborah, blah, blah. It says that the strong sense of community and brotherhood among the Quakers helped sustain them through the hardships of the frontier. They provided care and aid to the sick or struggling. At the same time, they were strict about the conduct of the members, requiring violators to make a written confession of errors and acknowledgement of justice. The confessions were posted on the door of the meeting house. Think about that. I mean, you have to have a conviction of your faith to be willing to self-report a moral conviction that what you did was wrong and you expect better of yourself, to come forward and say, hey, I did this thing and I'm sorry and I want to do better. There's also an accountability that comes with that. When you feel like you've got to tell the community when you're an ass and you really are tied to that moral obligation, well, then you'll think twice about doing things that you ought not to do. Different. For sure, since right now the world tries to tell you nothing you do is wrong. It's just your truth and my truth.
Yeah, I don't know. Would you rather confess your sins via like a written note on a door, or would you rather jump into a box with like an old man with a pointy hat?
Yeah, I mean, this is old, and
it's interesting.
Definitely more accountability this way. It's not just one person that is sworn to secrecy. This is.
That's a heavy,
public humiliation.
Gosh, the gossip mill there must be just raging.
It says Squire Boone was a weaver and a blacksmith. He also farmed his land and ran a grist mill, and he had a substantial herd of cattle. A man of many parts, hardworking and talented, Squire was neighbor to Mennonites, Swedish Lutherans, Presbyterians, Huguenots, and Moravians, as well as Quakers. Though he grew increasingly independent and liberal in his thinking, he was a man of patience and common sense. This is Boone's father. And like his father before him, he was touched with restlessness, curiosity, and urge to move on. Among the Boone's neighbors in the area were the extensive Lincoln family. Boone's and Lincoln several times intermarried. Sarah Lincoln, sister of John Lincoln, who was the great-grandfather of President Lincoln, married William Boone, son of George Boone and Deborah Boone by friend
world
ceremony.
Is so small.
Anne Boone, daughter of Squire's brother James, married Abraham Lincoln on July 10, 1760. Let's do the math there. So Anne Boone is Daniel Boone's niece. So Daniel Boone's niece married Abraham Lincoln.
Have you heard of 6 Degrees of Bacon? Or familiar with this?
No, but I'm about to hear about it, aren't I?
Yeah, you are. So Kevin Bacon, right? You know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Kevin Bacon from Footloose.
Yeah.
Okay, so the thing is, it's to illustrate how small the world is.
Right.
6 Degrees of Bacon is a concept that anyone within Hollywood, anyone who's ever been in a movie, you can trace them within 6 steps of having a movie with Kevin Bacon. They worked with the co-star who 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 worked with Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
Or they have touched Kevin Bacon. So everyone within Hollywood is within 6 steps of Bacon. And so like it's just funny because I think that kind of is applicable to a lot of the world.
Yeah. I agree.
Like when you're part of a community, like it just bumps you up those steps so much more. And it's just, the Lincolns and the Boones knew each other.
What's interesting here, and we'll get into it a little bit more, is you got to know like the number of settlers that came started out small. Mm-hmm. And the founding folks were just so many people.
A couple hundred families.
So everybody knew everybody, and everybody sort of intermingled at this time. And they all came with
clannish.
They came with them a certain type of toughness. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it that far, and they wouldn't have been willing to settle there. Mm-hmm. So you have a certain stock that's showing up as well.
Here's the deal. You just know what it took to get to where you're at. Mm-hmm. So anyone standing on the same soil as you has to be of a specific caliber.
Yeah.
period, just by grace of being there.
So it says the Boones and the Lincolns would be acquainted later also in Virginia and Kentucky. So Abraham Lincoln actually and Daniel Boone sort of crossed paths multiple times. It says, from the very beginning, the family sensed that Daniel was different from the other children. Lively, apparently tireless, curious. When very young, he helped out in the family trades of blacksmithing, milling, and farming. But family lore has it that from the very first, Daniel liked to roam in the woods. Ole was mostly forest then, a green world of rolling hills and small streams, and from his childhood, Daniel preferred to move and rove and study the ways of the wild. He seemed to be an outdoorsman and hunter, born to be an outdoorsman and hunter, the way John Keats was born to be a poet. One early biographer described the infant Daniel playing with his father's powder horn and rifle where they had been laid down after a hunt. Daniel's closest relationship was with who, Brent?
His dog.
Mother. Tall Welsh Sarah, with her black eyes and cheerful disposition. From his birth, she seemed to favor Daniel of all her children, tolerating his pranks, his tendency to slip away into the woods for hours, for whole days. The bond between mother and son was intense, affectionate, inspiring. It seemed she put her fondest hopes in this independent, sometimes wayward boy, driven by enthusiasms for the wild and curiosity about the world beyond the farm, beyond the river. Daniel's uncle, John Webb, took a particular interest in the boy also, keeping him and petting him for weeks together at his house for his own 4 children, with his own 4 children.
You know, I had a conversation with someone a while ago, and they were just talking about my past work history and working in the hunting industry, and this gentleman said that he gets nervous when he's out in the woods.
Yeah.
And I don't relate to that, like, at all. Like, I remember being a little kid, being alone, walking around in the woods and not being freaked out by that. But I do get freaked out by walking around in the city.
Yeah. I mean, that's not entirely surprising. I mean, we are, as humans, afraid of what we don't know, what we don't understand, right? If you spend all your time in a concrete jungle,
I was just going to say, man, concrete weirds me out.
and then you go someplace else where you're in the sticks, and we grew up in the boonies. And, middle of nowhere. And there were no neighbors. And you just walked around in the woods and went down to the creek and snuck down to Abernathy, caught crawdads and bullfrogs. And we just spent all our time outside.
I was less
climbed
sneaky
trees.
than you.
We broke
I didn't get away
things.
with that too much.
A lot had changed by the time you came along. You know,
Mom's
I was like
sense-
15 when you were born.
Yeah, mom's senses were honed.
I mean, if you think about it, when you were
You were out of the house by the time
5,
I was 4.
I was 20.
Yeah.
That's 20 years different between when I was, at least a good 15 years between our childhood, and a lot happened out there with settlement and stuff. I remember driving out to where we used to live. We'd cruise down the long road. There was one house between like the main highway and where we lived. It was just, other than that, it was just cows and trees. By the time I was graduating from high school, there were houses all up and down the road.
Yeah.
And still on big lots, big acreage. It was zoned that way.
But you could still see them from your door.
Not really. I mean, a few later when we moved a second time, but it was like that. And so I was very comfortable in the woods, as you as well. But I think if you grow up in the city, I heard Joe Rogan once on a podcast just talking about growing up in what was it, Brooklyn or something like that. Like he grew up in a major city. You're different, man. That's a different world. And for you and I, when we go to big cities, I mean, I got used to it living in Japan for years, in Hiroshima, other cities. And then throughout my life, I've traveled and been in giant cities, and I'm okay with it now. But I do recall the first few times I went into massive cities, I felt like a fish out of water. I felt like this place sucks. I hated it. The solitude. When I first landed in Japan and I was in a city, I was like, where are the birds? Where's the sound of just silence? There was no escaping. There was nowhere to go, hardly, to not hear the city. Even when we rode our bikes up into the mountains, you had to get pretty far, but everywhere you looked, if you just turned around and looked, every valley had buildings in it. And so it was very hard to get remote, I guess. We're spoiled here in the United States because we can still find those places.
Very true.
Going back to the book, let's see. It says, in October of 1744, Squire Boone, Daniel's father, bought 25 acres of land 5 miles north of his home in Ole. That was where he pastured his livestock, and from the age of 10, Daniel accompanied Sarah there in summer to look after the cattle and the sheep. From spring until fall, he lived with her in a cabin in the woods. For the rest of his life, Daniel would look back on those summers as an idyllic time. He was assigned to keep an eye on the herds, help with the cows, while his mother made milk and butter and cheese. Once a week, they carried the milk and the milk products on foot back to the homestead. They had their little sort of farm area, and then they lived over there at the homestead. For Daniel, the forest was his mother world, a place of shadows, mystery, infinite diversions, and pleasure. The settlement and town were the masculine world of trade and business, meeting house, authority, and strictness. He would always be closer to the mother world than to the father world. His deepest affinity was with the forest and the streams. From day one, drawn to spend a lot of times alone in the woods, exploring the woods. Lampers told me once, when he read this, Boone just was like, he's like, I was born in the wrong era. Like, I belong then. This is, if he were born then, this would have suited him perfectly, Daniel spent much of those summers exploring the nearby and not so nearby woods. Though he had little formal schooling, he studied the ways of animals, of deer and bear, foxes and panthers. He learned to read signs, tracks and droppings, broken twigs, bent down grass, torn moss, and as early biographer W.H. Bogart phrased it, he learned lessons of the snow and the leaves and moss, and to detect with a quick eye the tread of foot. From Sarah, he seemed to have inherited a Quaker calm and patience, a sense of intimacy with place and weather, with all life, including Indian life and Indian ways. He delighted in solitude. It is likely that most of the milking and work with the dairy was done by his mother, since milking and butter making were considered women's work. From the beginning, the complexities and contradictions of Daniel's character seemed evident. He loved most to spend time alone in the woods, observing and learning, tracking and trapping and killing game. Indians still lived in the neighborhood when Boone was a boy. One Indian, a close friend of George Boone, his grandpa, built a cabin on Boone's land, lived to an old age, and was buried close by. The local Shawnee Indians liked him because he respected their ways and admired their knowledge of the land and the forest. There was almost a Franciscan humility and reverence for life in the young Boone. Yet he was a hunter, a killer of the wild animals. And though he was a Quaker, Brent, Daniel was a fighting Quaker. The stories of his youthful pranks and fights, told by Boone's son Nathan to Lyman Draper in 1851, make it clear the young Daniel was no pacifist. Once, two sisters carrying a bucket of fish guts to empty during the shad run saw Daniel sleeping under a tree. Unable to resist the temptation, they dumped the contents of the bucket on his face. Brushing the slimy entrails out of his hair and eyes, the young Daniel jumped up and bloodied the girls' noses and sent them home howling. Within minutes, the girls' mothers stormed into Sarah Boone's kitchen and accused Daniel of attacking her daughters. But the peaceable Quakeress would not tolerate the tirade against her son. "If thee has not brought up thy daughters to better behavior," she said, "it is high time they were taught good manners. And if Daniel has given them a lesson, I hope for my part that it will in the end do them no harm. And I have only to add that I bid thee good day."
I love it.
If my son kicked their ass, they had it coming. Maybe if you had taught him better manners, this wouldn't be a problem.
Hey, you know what? Sometimes the truth hurts.
Dude, it was funny because at our house, there was always so I'm the oldest of 8. And before you came along, I had a lot of sisters in between. My favorite people on the planet are my siblings. Some of my favorite people on the planet are my siblings. And when we were young, there was that rule, guys shouldn't hit girls. But at our house, maybe our mom was a feminist at the time, like second wave, something like that. But she was like, look, if you're going to hit your brother, expect to get hit back. There's never any reason to hit a girl. My mom was not a fan of that at all. But she was like, my dad was like, you hit a girl, you're dead. My mom was like, dude, if she hits you, hit her back.
Yep.
And I can recall, girls, I was the oldest, but my sister Carrie was right behind me in age. And Carrie is an Amazon and was early to puberty. And she was a big, strong girl, always an athlete. She we're about the same. I think we're the same height. I don't know. She might be a little bit taller. I can never. If she puts on heels, I'm doomed.
Yeah.
She's taller than me.
It's hard to tell how tall a woman really is. They're very consistent.
Yeah, and she was a brawler, always has been. And Carrie came at me a lot, and my mom was like, "Carrie, one of these days, you can hold your own a little bit, but he's a boy, and when he gets older and he turns around and whoops on you, I'm not going to stop him."
In like 6 months.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it came about. And but this is funny because Boone's mother had no problems about this behavior either. Yeah. It's interesting. So she must have known that her son isn't the type. He's a gentle boy, but you do something like that, you're going to get it, You
cross the line and get smacked.
And she bid thee good day. It says the young Daniel often demonstrated a tendency to wander off without much concern for the worry his absence might cause others. I think Lampers is like this. Like, we'd be on a hunt when we first started hunting together, and he'd just be gone. He hadn't hunted with a partner other than his cousin Joey. I mean, really, in years and years and years. And I think even they, being growing up together, that there's quite an independence for both of them being just go off. It says, however much he loved his mother and however much he later loved his wife, Rebecca, his urge to hunt and wander and explore always came first. From the time he was a boy, Boone had a flair for the dramatic. He seemed to know instinctively how to make himself noticed, remembered. As a young man, he began to create for himself the role of Daniel Boone, and he spent much of his life perfecting that role. Despite his later protestation that he was, quote, but a common man, he seemed aware from early in his youth that he was not just playing himself, but a type, what Emerson would later call a representative man.
A representative man?
Yeah, a representative man. It says, Boone would embody in his actions and attitude the aspirations of character of a whole era. At least once, Daniel became so distracted by his own explorations that he forgot the hours of the day. His home, the fact that he was supposed to help his mother, he forgot about that. Before it got dark, Sarah had to round up the cattle herself and do the milking, strain the milk, and put it in the spring house to stay cool. Calm and prayerful, she worked at churning butter from clabbered milk. But when Daniel did not come home by the next morning and still had not returned by noon the following day, she had no choice but to walk the 5 miles back to town to get some help.
Oof.
A search party was formed, and they combed over the Ole Hills, all the way to the Never Sink mountain range northwest of the Monocacy Valley. They found no sign of Daniel that afternoon. But starting out early the next morning, they traveled farther and spotted a column of smoke. Late in the afternoon, they reached the source of the smoke and found Daniel sitting on a bearskin and roasting fresh bear meat on the fire. When asked if he was lost, he said no. He had known where he was all along, on the south shoulder of the hill 9 miles from the pasture. The search party accused him of scaring his mother and forcing them all to waste time looking for him. But he calmly answered he had started tracking the bear and didn't want to lose it. And besides, here was fresh meat for everybody.
I mean, he's got a point. I mean, when you're on, you're on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's he supposed to do? He can't really leave all that meat and go tell everyone.
It was a punk thing to do. But he's like, it just goes to show his priorities and his way of thinking is I'm on the chase. All things get dropped. I'm on the hunt and this is it. And I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to fail. I'm getting this thing. And that's a mindset that you'll see it with a bird dog or something. It's just they'll never quit. They get obsessed and they can't think about anything else. I know a guy, similar to this. I hunt with him all the time. It says, whether this story is true or just one of the legends that grew around Boone later in life, it reveals as much about the way he was perceived and remembered as it does about his character. People later recalled that even from his boyhood, there was a sense that Daniel had been singled out. The story of the search party echoes the story in Luke 2:49 of the 12-year-old Jesus lost from Mary and Joseph. The boy is finally found in the temple conversing with the elders. When he is questioned and scolded, he explains that he has been about his father's business. The sense of the story is that Boone had already found his calling and his destiny. It is clear he also knew how to make a memorable impression. For Boone, there was something erotic about the woods, a playground, a place of sometimes dangerous pleasure, and some would later suggest that with his lifelong passion for hunting, there was part of Boone that never quite grew up. Boone's cunning and love of pranks are also recorded in many of the childhood anecdotes Lyman Copeland and Draper and others collected later. One tale Boone himself liked to repeat in old age concerned his confinement to the house during an outbreak of smallpox. His mother would not let him or his sister Elizabeth outdoors to play. Sick of the imprisonment, young Daniel and Elizabeth decided to catch the smallpox themselves and get it over with so they could go out and play as usual. That night,
kid logic.
That night, they slipped away to a neighbor's house and crawled into bed with friends who were infected with smallpox, then returned home before daybreak.
Oh. Could murder a kid.
When a few days later the red marks began to appear on him, Sarah grew suspicious. "Now, Daniel," she said to her son, "I want thee to tell thy mother the whole truth." Daniel readily confessed the initiative he had taken. Thee naughty little Gorrel," she cried. Gorrel. Why did thee not tell me before, so I could have had thee better prepared?" Sarah called him an old English word for knave, but was too affectionate to punish him. It was the kind of story Boone, as an old man, liked to recall of his beloved mother. Squire Boone, however, was not so indulgent with his sons. When he punished them, he would swing the strap until they begged for forgiveness. Then he would quit whipping and talk with them calmly. But Daniel was more stubborn than his brothers and endured the punishment in silence. "Canst thou not beg?" the frustrated father would ask, but Daniel would never answer, leaving Squire to make up his own mind when the punishment was sufficient. Even as a boy, Boone showed the stoicism and self-control he was later renowned for. I was like that. If I was ever punished for something I didn't feel I should have been punished for, I was so angry and so indignant. And if I got a spanking from mom and dad, I was like, okay. And dad would always feel bad and be like, I didn't want it. And I'd just be like, I was so mad. And I just would like not show any emotion as best I could. Just, okay, whatever. And it was your only stoicism was your only, like, it didn't hurt me. I don't care. That was your only defiance.
Little fight back.
And my daughter, my middle daughter, I remember, doing the same, spanking her or she'd get in trouble, and the kid just never gave me anything to go on. And you're like, okay, I guess there's no, like the other one would be, I'm sorry, all that. Not that one.
Nope.
So he didn't like that. His dad never quite knew where he was at. He's just like, I'll take it like a man, and that's it. So, and it's interesting because he says even as a boy, he showed that stoicism and self-control that he was later renowned for. And many times when Daniel Boone is in a life-threatening situation and others panic, he's just like, we'll see what happens. Yeah, I could die a really horrible, painful, miserable death, but hey, maybe not. And he could just stay so calm. So as we get into the book more, and we encounter these situations where he's captured by Indians and they more or less let him go because they're going to run him down and kill him, and he somehow evades them. Like, those kinds of stories are fascinating. This happens many times.
Some people don't handle stressful situations. They have that red line real fast, 0 to 60.
Yeah.
Like our father. It's 0 or it's 60. There's no in between.
Yeah. But our mother's the opposite.
Yeah, if I broke my leg, I want mom around.
Yeah, but if I need someone to lift the car off of the top of me, I need dad.
Yes.
It says that while he roved the woods and tended his father's cattle, Daniel cut and carved a stick which he used to kill animals, rabbits, and squirrels, possums, and wild turkeys. Before he owned a gun, Boone was already a hunter, with the patience, sharp eye, and deadly aim of the successful hunter who learned something new every day as he went into the woods again. He was proud of his skill at cleaning and dressing a turkey. Often he cooked outdoors for himself, and Sarah hanging the bird on a stick over the flames. He cooked for himself and his mother. He would hang the bird on a stick over the flames, turning it to bake on all sides. With a piece of curved bark, he caught the drippings, which he used to baste the turkey. When his mother asked how he had learned to do that, he said merely that an Indian had showed him how it was done.
But that felt real good as a mom.
Yeah, it was a different time, though, back then. They very much learned each other's languages, and they were much more friendly early on, because think about it, the native people were seeing technology being brought to them they'd never seen before, which was astonishing, right? Who are these people? And these people were learning from the native people how to live off the land and all the things that they knew. And each were trading and benefiting and growing and progressing. It wasn't until there seemed to be no halting of the immigration that it really started to create a conflict. But there was a time that was for 50 to 100 years in areas where it was quite peaceful between Native people and the new people. It says, when Daniel was almost 13, he was given his first firearm, which was a short rifle gun, with which he roamed the nearby flying hills, the Ole Hills, and the Neversink Mountains. The flying hills were named for the flocks of turkeys that lived there. The rifle was probably made by Squire Boone, who, besides keeping 6 looms busy with hired hands, farming and running his blacksmith shop and mill, was also a gunsmith.
Nice.
These early Quakers, man, they are self-sufficient. They got it all.
They have to. I mean, that's part of the thing is like their community has to be self-sufficient.
His skill at making and repairing guns was passed down to his 4th son. It would be an essential life-saving skill in later years in the wilderness beyond the mountains. Later on, you start to find out that a lot of people need their guns fixed, and folks keep gunsmiths alive because they need their guns fixed.
True.
So when they go to murder or kill a lot of people, you're like, well, I fix guns. All right, don't kill him. We need that guy. Definitely a good skill to have. As a blacksmith, Squire Boone had taken an apprentice named Henry Miller, 2 or 3 years older than Daniel. Henry and Daniel soon got into a fist fight, and then, as often happens with those who begin by fighting, they became lifelong friends. Henry taught Daniel blacksmithing and gunsmithing, as he learned the skills himself. Together, they hunted and fished and played pranks on neighbors and on other members of the Boone family. Once they overloaded a rifle that was to be lent to a neighbor named Will Coxon. Will Coxon, who knew little about guns, was to pick up the already loaded rifle in the morning for a deer hunt. How would that be? An already loaded rifle because you don't really know how to do it, and then you just walk out. You get one shot, basically.
Yeah, like what?
During the night, the boys took out the lead ball, added 6 times the usual amount of powder, and replaced the bullet.
Did he die?
As soon as the neighbor took the rifle away, the boys realized
they gave the man a bomb.
What they had done. A seriously overloaded rifle might well explode, injuring Will Coxon, perhaps
easily,
even killing him.
Yeah.
Sick with guilt and dread, they listened as he stalked off into the woods. Later, they heard a report like the blast of a cannon, and running toward the sound of the blast, were relieved to see Will Coxon stumbling out of the woods, his face bruised and bloody from a cut on his forehead. He said the recoil of the gun had thrown him to the ground. When he heard the story...
Hold on, but did he get it?
When he heard the story, Squire Boone answered that the load had been so light he could have rested the gun on his nose without hurting it. Daniel and Henry asked Will Coxon if he had killed the deer, but the poor man was so surprised by the force of the blast he hadn't noticed his target. But Will Coxon recovered the dry wit and commented that he thought it was a pretty deer shot. The boys ran into the woods and found the deer and brought it to the neighbor, who likely after that learned to load his gun for himself.
Smart. You know what? Smart.
All right, so Brent, what do you think of the book so far?
I like Boone as a kid. He's a bit of a shithead running around the woods. But I got a soft spot in my heart for little shithead boys running around the woods.
Yeah, he's a good, he seems to love the outdoors, and that's just natural. We're going to learn more about his childhood and as he grows up, what life was like on the frontier, which I think is fascinating. We have a lot of the book to go. Now, what I want to say is on this first episode, we read from the book a lot more than we will in the future, but I felt like this first section, there's so much to cover just to set the stage that there was a lot of heavy reading here. Mm-hmm. Next episode, we'll have a little more discussion as we just grab as we pull from sections of the book that I think are beneficial and kind of tell the story. All right, folks, if you enjoy the show, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Leave us a comment. We always appreciate that. And share it with your friends and family. Get the word out. Got a new podcast going on. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. All right, folks. I hope you're enjoying the Dueling Pistols podcast. If you like it, do us a favor and share it with a friend. Help us get this thing to grow a little bit bigger. Tell your dad, your mom, your brother, your sister, your buddy, your uncle.
Go to
your
contacts,
grandpa.
hit select all, send.
Just sell it. Just share it with a friend of yours, somebody, and help us spread the word about the show. Thanks for supporting us. We'll catch you on the next episode.